Welcome to MasterMind Minutes, the leading podcast for franchisors, franchisees, and entrepreneurs of all types. We have one guest, we ask one question, and we get one expert answer, and we do it in minutes, not hours. Good morning, and welcome to another edition of MasterMind Minutes. My name is Gary Occhiogrosso. I am the founder and managing partner for Franchise Growth Solutions. As most of you know, we are the premier franchise development and franchise sales organization in the United States and perhaps in North America. We're not really sure. We don't keep track of those things. And for those of you new to MasterMind Minutes, we are a very simple podcast, easy to listen to, condensed into minutes, not hours, as we say. We typically have one guest, we ask one question or have one topic, and we get one expert answer. Those are the only rules that we use on this program. Today, our guest is Josh Fonger, and Josh is a consultant, coach, and speaker who is recognized as a leading authority in business performance architecture and the CEO of WTS Enterprises, which he'll tell us about in just a few minutes. He has a unique experience of helping hundreds of businesses grow simply using the WTS method. I'm not going to give away the WTS yet, Josh. I'll leave that up to you. His specialty is taking stressed out entrepreneurs from working in their business to working on their business, as those of us who are in this field generally say, so that they profit and they freedom, they have more freedom, more profit. I always say you go into business to have more time and money, so it's another way of saying it. And they can do it with a consistent methodology in how they perform that task and basically end up either working less or working smarter and getting a better result. So Josh, I hope I didn't butcher that too much for you, but before we get into the question, first of all, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And what can you tell us more about yourself and about WTS before we get to the question?
Hey, great. Great to be here. I've enjoyed our chats already so far. And I'm passionate about this topic. I guess a little bit more about me. Christian business consultant and coach. I've been working with Sam Carpenter for over 10 years. He's the author of Work the System, which is what WTS stands for. And what we do is mechanically, there's the book right there if you're watching the video. Mechanically, we help people make more and work less. And we do that by getting everything that's out of their heads into systems. And systems so that they can be scaled, repeated. You can franchise if you want to, open up new locations. But basically, our ideal market who we work with are people who are they're stuck in the business, like they cannot get out. And this was definitely not the career choice on purpose. This is by accident. I really wanted to get into real estate development and had my undergraduates in architecture, my graduate is in business, but I wanted to be a real estate developer. And through a series of events, 2007, 8, 9, that period of time, had a kind of a shift, a change of course. And I would say by God's providence, I ended up becoming a business consultant. And it definitely was not what I wanted to do. I wrote my thesis paper about why you should not hire a business consultant, why they're a waste of money, why this is actually not what you should be doing. And so that was really the last job that I wanted to have. But through a series of events, I won't bore you with the story. That's the only job I could get was a business consultant at age 26 there. And just fell in love with it. Had great success with it. I've been doing it for 15 years now and haven't stopped. Got to see a lot of the last 15 years in business and just enjoy the work.
Well, I hear you. I love the way you put that. It's interesting. I will tell you as a consultant, where I, by the way, I got into consulting quite by accident, so to speak. And when I say by accident, I came to the realization that it was much too much work to try to control the universe, to just let it unfold and then see the opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities with different systems. And you use the term system. And, interestingly enough, a lot of what you do, we do on a practical level also with concepts that want to become franchises. We essentially document their system so that the system sort of, people run the system, systems run the business. So I hear you. And I will also fess up that when I started out in this franchising business, I started out as a franchisee of Dunkin' Donuts back then. And I suffered from what I later learned the term shop lock, where essentially I didn't understand the difference between the business and the work of the business. I was doing the work of the business. And as a result, I had no time to grow my business. I was a very good employee. I always showed up on time. I worked longer and harder than anyone else, but I benefited perhaps the least at that time because I hadn't crossed that bridge. And that's sort of the question here. That's what I want to talk about, because that's what you're expert in and that's what you preach and teach to people. And that is, how does just it how do you stop working sort of in the business? It's a tough bridge to cross. We're brought up, I know my generation, I was brought up, go to school, you get a good job, or if you open a business, you have to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, never take vacations, and then you die. Okay, that's not what it's about. So how I got out of it just very quickly was I met a guy that had like he either had 2 or 3 Dunkins, which back in the 80s, that was a tough thing to do because we made donuts. And when I asked him how he did that, I was 26, he was probably in his 50s. I asked him, how did you do that? Or what do I need to do? And he said, you need another store. And I said, how am I going to run another store? He said, see, your problem is you're in the store. If you had 2, you wouldn't be in any one of them. You'd figure it out how to run it. And the light bulb went off in my head. So please fill in the blanks for our audience. How do we stop thinking about working in the business? I know it's cliche, and work on the business.
Yeah. And I wish I could give you a pithy answer like, hey, here's the answer, 3 words. It's probably going to take us the next, 15, 20 minutes to unpack. But the first step is to realize that you are not the business, right? Your business is a separate thing apart from you. And it's an entity that generates value for a certain buyer, right? So it's a machine, right? It's not you. And your job is to, develop the systems to make that machine run as optimally as possible. Now, temporarily, you can be an employee in the business, but that's what you'd be. You'd be an employee in the business, but ideally, you'd find another employee to be in the business. And I always see with business owners who are stuck is we'll do an org chart early on, and I'll say, we got people all these places, but who's the CEO? Who's the owner? Who's actually growing the business? And we realize that no one's doing that because they're too busy making sales calls or delivering or whatever it might be, customer service. And so I want them to know that this business is a machine, and we just kind of documented what it should look like. And there's a hole, and the hole is at the top, right? And that's why it's not growing. That's why it's not expanding. That's why no one's actually doing the system development, developing the operations. And once they see that, then it's not, okay, one day later, they're CEO and everything's fine. It's a process of taking everything that's in their head and figuring out how do we set this up so that others can do it, or that it can be automated, or technology can do it, or the business can be simplified so that that work doesn't need to be done, so that mechanically they can free up their time and actually lead the business with a clear strategy, with a clear principles and culture, and then with clear scalable operations. And but the first thing is to kind of not see yourself in the business, but Sam in the book refers to it as being outside and slightly elevated. So see yourself outside the business and then objectively look down on it and see what you have. And usually it's pretty chaotic, and usually it doesn't function or make sense at all without you there initially. And so then we start to build those pieces.
Well, I hear you, and I can relate again as a sort of a lifelong entrepreneur, although I did have jobs in between, but my jobs were always sort of entrepreneurial in that sense that I had autonomy to create brands and systems. I guess was one of those people. I'm learning, okay? I'm still learning. I'm 66. I've been doing this 35 years, and every day I learn something new. But one of the things that I would tell you I spend most time on learning is coming to embrace the idea. You said the business is not you. Coming to embrace the idea that someone else can do it as well as I can. Like I was of the belief, well, only I can do it. No one can do it as good as me. Okay. All right. But the reality is, if you take what you do, that process, and you simplify it, and you document it, and you teach it as a repeatable process in the grand scheme of things, then you can take someone and teach them to do what you do. No one is indispensable. And what I want to say before I get to the next question here is I look at two tech businesses, okay? Give you an example, Microsoft and Apple, okay? Microsoft was not about Bill Gates. As a matter of fact, Microsoft did much better and does a lot better, but Gates is not there anymore, okay? Apple, on the other hand, was built around Steve Jobs. He was the brand. Now, listen, I'm a huge Apple fan. Apple's doing great. Tim Cook's doing a fantastic job. But when Steve Jobs passed, there was some questions like, what's going to happen to the Apple brand? Because it wasn't about Apple, it was about Steve Jobs. And that to me is like a huge issue where how do we take ourselves out of it? How do we get into, I'm going to use the term mindset. We'll use, how do I get into the system mindset and not the worker mindset? Like how do we cross that bridge?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of questions woven in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would start with the first one that came to my mind, which was that people actually can do what you do and probably better than you. And I'll say that at first that's not true, because usually the owner is doing some sales, they're fixing the printer. In your case, you do a lot of restaurants, they're flipping the burgers. Like they actually are indispensable, because no one is able to do 15 different jobs that are all diverse in real time and shift and change and get there early and stay late. Like you're right, no one else can do that, because no one else would do that. And that's true. But if you were to separate, like, okay, here's the sales portion of my job, here's the marketing portion, here's the advertising, here's the, in this case, restaurant, like the cooking portion, the cleaning portion. If you separate them into simple pieces, discrete, start and stop processes, you can find probably a 17-year-old who could do it. My first jobs were in restaurants, right? So when I was 14, I was in a bagel shop making bagels, right? So the point is, if you simplify and you isolate and you separate the different pieces of the business, it is very simple to bring in people who can do that work, right? And that's the first thing that we try to let people know, is that if you simplify and you isolate the separate pieces of your business, it can be delegated away and you can build a team. But if you keep it in your head and you keep it gray and you keep it all situational and nuanced and complicated and interdependent, then you're right. Yeah, no one else is going to be able to take, 20 years of experience. And I cut my teeth in consulting with flooring stores and Carpet Ones and Flooring Americas. And so work with hundreds of those flying around the country. And these owners, they grew up in family businesses. They grew up in the flooring store. They inherited their dads. And like, no one can do what I do. And I'm like, so yeah, you've been doing this for 20 years. You know all the SKUs, you know all the vendors, you know the price. Like you're right. Yeah, no one's going to be able to do it like that. But if you were to, separate the sales process, how do we greet someone when they come in the door? How do we look up the SKU? How do we discount the price? Like separate pieces, anyone can do it. And that, again, people can have the light bulb go on in their brain instantly. Like, I get it. Now, implementation is another thing, right? That's the difficult part. That's the part I work on.
Absolutely.
Right, is now let's take the weeks, months, sometimes years of unraveling all of those things that are undocumented, that are chaos, that are loose, and let's tighten them up and let's systemize them. Let's get people in there to do them, and then see what happens. And it will expand. But I really like your idea about, hey, I'm stuck in the business. If you just had more locations, you wouldn't be. I had a gym owner. That was the thing. He's like, well, I'm just stuck in the gym. I said, okay, you wanted to open up 2 more? Let's do that. And once all of our conversations were about these 2 additional gyms, so we'd have 3 gyms, like he just, well, I have to stop doing what I'm doing. There's no way I'm going to be able to open these 2 other gyms. And then he started thinking like a business owner, because these other 2 locations, like 6 months turned into 5 months, turned into 4 months, like it's happening. Like you've got to start moving, because these other gyms are opening and you can't keep doing it like this. And that forced deadline and that forced need allowed him to, become a leader and actually grow 3 gyms instead of 1 gym. But it wasn't until he mentally made the leap, and then he forced himself into that situation that he finally made the changes.
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, one of the things that we do um, is we write operations manuals for individuals who want to take their business and franchise it, or even if they don't franchise. I mean, what I will point out to folks is that companies, brands like, say, Chipotle or Starbucks, they are not franchised businesses. Those are not independent operators running those individual restaurants. They are all company stores. Now, separate that from how those stores operate, and they operate under a franchise prototype system. Everything in there is documented, everything in there is trained, everything in there is a repeatable process. And that's how, again, it took me a while to learn that. Fortunately, when I was young, I was in Duncan, and they kind of, beat that into my head, which was good. But it is definitely a necessary piece that the systems be broken down, as you point out. And I mean, really broken down. How do you greet the guest when they walk in? I can remember back in my Dunkin' days, they actually had a specification for how far the coffee machine, at that time we had a coffee machine right near a cash register, just for people who were coming in for coffee and a donut, how far the coffee machine was from the cash register. They had figured out that, I don't know, the wingspan of the average human being was X. And in order to be able to just reach over and pour a cup of coffee, give it to the guest, and hit the cash register was X. And that was in the manual. That was documented, and it was a system. And while I didn't recognize it then, I recognize it now, that was super important, because that reduced labor. And labor being reduced meant more money in my pocket as the owner. So tell me about, how do these systems, have you seen that this actually, I guess it increases productivity. How does it increase the owner's ability to have the 2 things that I always tell people they should be in business for: more time and more money?
Well, how does it do that? It in a lot of different ways, because you just mentioned every single aspect of productivity that your team is doing, if they can do 10% more, 20% more, multiplied by 5 employees, 10 employees, 100 employees, that equates to more value, which equates to more production, which is more money in your pocket. And the more you simplify, the less of it you have to do personally. And that's why people, love that book, Work the System, by Sam Carpenter, because it takes you through Sam Carpenter's 100-hour work week, where he's sleeping at the business, living at the business. It's a call center, and goes down to working 2 hours a month. Like, how did that happen? Right. And it happened piece by piece by piece. Right. And I think that, you mentioned that thing about the coffee, that excites me. Like, that little shift in a little bit of productivity multiplied again and again and again. I just think about when I first started off, and I was in insurance sales, and they had a script, and I wanted to call people to, sell insurance. And they said, hey, I just said, I'll set appointments with these people to sell insurance. I said, don't use that word. Here's the script. Say you're going to pop on over. And I was like, well, I never say I'm going to pop on over. Just say pop on over. You're going to be able to book 3 times as many appointments if you just say, hey, can I pop on over? They're going to say yes. If you say, I would like to schedule an appointment with you, they're going to say, oh, no. And I was like, okay, now I understand why there's, all this learning that happens. If you don't write it down, it's not going to stick. Maybe it would stick with me, but the next person, if they didn't get that same written script, they're going to do it their own way. They're going to fail and not know why. And you have to have a way to take the best practices and document them. So, I don't know what your original question is, but a key aspect of what we do is always say, you have to document the best way to do everything in your business. And you're going to find that 5% improvement here, 10% improvement here, 20% improvement here. It's going to be the accumulation of those is going to free up your ability to hire and train and quality control and measure and all those things, consistency. But you're just going to see, and we tell our clients, like, hey, don't necessarily worry about the end goal, which is more money, more time. If you just work on these systems, it's going to happen. Like 1 + 1 = 2. If you just, the systems are going to produce the result. And if the systems are tighter and they produce more value, so you can raise prices, and then the money and time are going to show up. So we know you want that. Let's focus on how you greet the customer at the door, how you set the appointment, or how I've got a few restaurants that I'm working with right now, how you make the burger, like all these things. Just focus on that. Get the recipe, instead of taking, 8 minutes of labor, can we get it down to 4 minutes of labor? Instead of taking, can we make it better? Can we make it faster? And there's some magic that happens between just, we all know how to do it the right way, to writing it down and then having people be able to look at it. Because once it's written down in some form, whether it's video or screencast recorded or text, people can look at it and they can say, you know what, there is a better way to do this. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with companies where they've been doing it the same way for 10 years. They finally write it down and they say, there is a better way to do this. And it might save a little bit of time here. And then they do the math. I say, let's do the math. And they're like, wow, we've been wasting $100,000 a year for the last 20 years, just in this one little process that we never wrote down. And that's when the light bulb goes on, and they say, let's just make this a part of our culture. Let's make this a part of our strategy. And then they slowly go through and we say, work the system.
So there's so much there to unpack. There's just so much in what you just said. I like, my head is spinning because again, when we do manuals for a company, very often we're not going in necessarily and writing down what they're currently doing and saying, here's your manual. Very often, because they want to scale their business, we have to go in there with a new, and it's interesting because we're not tainted, so to speak. We don't know like all the years of, hey, this is how you do it, or this is how we've always done it. And we'll go in there and sort of reinvent it to a certain extent. And to your point, they'll look at it and go, you know what? We've been so close to this thing. We never really saw it that way. And now they see it a different way. What I would want to add to that, and then I do have another question here for you, but what we've also learned about documenting systems is that it's not a static process. It's not a one and done. And if the owner of the company is not free, if the owner of the company is tied to the work of the business, they can't go and, they always talk about monitoring the performance of people. And yeah, that's important because you want to train them, but you have to monitor the performance of the system. And if the system can use some tweaking because you've got some new learning, then you need to go back and you need to fix that system, or fix it, modify it, correct it, enhance it, whatever word you want to use. Talk a little bit about sort of we call operations manuals living documents. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally agree. We always say you're working on your systems, you're always working in your systems, you're always working the system. And again, it's people like to say, well, they're just SOPs, they're standard operating procedures. And they are very similar. But what we say is, instead of just saying, hey, they're standard, this is just the way we do it, we say that you're always actually working on them, as in like they are living, they are breathing, they always can be improved. And we want every person who's running a particular task to always think, and we always put, what is the goal? What is the outcome? What is the purpose of this process? So that as you're running it, you can say, you know what, there is a better way to hit that goal. There's a better way to hit that objective. We don't have to do 6 back and forth with the customers. We can just do 1 back and forth with the customer because there is a better way to do it. And so, again, our big thing is simplicity. If we keep the systems simple and we allow everyone culturally to know that they're a part of working on them, then they're going to always be adding those ideas. That the big challenge, and I'm sure you've seen, is that people, they will see it documented, they will come up with a better way to do it, but they'll just do it that way themselves. They won't actually tell anyone and then go back up the chain and get it documented and improved. And this is the big challenge we have, is saying that if you don't have a system to update your systems, over time, they will go old, they will go stagnant, they'll get rusty. And you'll find that when some of your people leave and you bring new ones on and they follow what's written down, you're going to be like, well, why is our performance worse? What's going on here? And it's because that, never got fed back into the system. And so we always make sure that that's part of the system we build, is that if you're going to write it down, you also have to have a way of auditing it, maintaining it, measuring it, going back to it, retraining it, updating it. And we want all of our clients every 6 months to pull up all of those ones they wrote 6 months ago. And, is there a better way to do this? Have we been doing it differently? We just never wrote it down. And, maybe it's a sentence, maybe it's an addition, maybe it's a clarification. And if you build that into the culture, it's going to be what sets you apart from your competition. It really is. And it's going to allow you to not have, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like, why did this problem happen? Why did this problem happen?
Mm-hmm.
Sam refers to it in the book about the moles, that game whack-a-mole, is that you're going to spend your life always playing whack-a-mole, or you're going to, continuously work on your systems, and you're going to prevent the moles from coming. You're going to kill the moles. Like, there won't be any moles left. And that's really his goal. And I'll tell you, even though he's, essentially retired, he's been a passive owner of his company for 15 years now, but he still likes it. He loves being a business owner. But he said the only role he plays now is just to remind his company and his leaders, hey, this is our strategy. Let me remind you, this is our culture. Let me remind you, and tell me what systems you're improving right now. And as long as he keeps, feeding his team that message in that direction, then they'll continue on the right path. And, but without that, leadership pushing people that way, they get involved in the day-to-day. They get involved in the fires of today, and they forget about, like you said, the focusing on the systems, because focusing on a person problem is important, but more important than that person problem is the system, because the systems are going to stay. People come and go, but systems stay. And so you really want to make sure that infrastructure is always getting better.
Yeah, this is brilliant stuff. I mean, I can just talk about this forever, but you sort of rattled my brain here a little bit in Jim Collins' book Good to Great, which is a classic. Mm-hmm. I'm paraphrasing, but there's this concept that calls I believe it's discuss, decide, execute, autopsy. So you kind of you look at it, you decide what you're going to do about it, you do it, and then you go back and you look at it and you say, wait a minute, how do we make it better? And that to me is a never-ending process that is going on constantly. And again, another reason why the entrepreneur, the visionary, the founder of the company needs to be free in order to do that. Because if someone needs to do that, and it's generally the entrepreneur who had the vision, if they're stuck in the mud, that doesn't get done. And as you said earlier, that top box never gets a name put in it, or the name in it is doing 20 other jobs. Talk to us a little bit. You used the term at one point, not here today, but yo-yo business. What's yo-yo business? What is
that? And I'm going to get to that, but your last statement made me think of something that you might find that you connect with, is that part of the reason why people don't do the autopsy at the end is, of course, they're too busy and they're frazzled going to the next fire. But I believe it also is that the standards aren't high enough so that they settle, or they're okay with it being done the way it is. It's good enough. We're okay with it. But as long as there's also a leader that has really high standards and is always pushing towards this perfection. I mean, you're never reaching perfection, but you're always pushing towards it. Then people, they run the system, they do the autopsy and say, can we do it better? Can we? And they'll take the time because they're pushing towards perfection on certain things. And perfection needs to be whatever your strategic objective is. Like, what is the objective of the company? What are the principles? Okay, that's our bullseye. Is our system getting us there? And so often I find that my clients don't have the high enough standard so that they don't have a need to actually improve their systems, because they're comfortable with the way it is. And that's kind of the whole point, is if you're going to go through the trouble of putting the systems together, documenting them, then you should also raise your standards, because they're going to allow you to get to a much higher standard than you ever thought. When Sam, in the call center industry, there's usually lots of mistakes, lots of chaos, lots of problems all the time. And he just said, no, we're going to go for perfection. That's our goal. And so they measure it, and they make one mistake every 15,000 phone calls. And, most of it's like, most call centers have one mistake every 100 phone calls, right? Like, they wanted to how do we push this even further and further and further and further? And the higher you move your standards, you're going to find a market that wants high standards, and you're going to be able to find that you can price differentiate by being the high price leader, because no one else is willing to do that, and systems allow you to do that. But back to the yo-yo business, real quick. The whole concept there is that most companies are kind of tied to a string. They go up, they go down, but they never break out. They never go to 10 locations. They never go from 1 million to 100 million. They just stay within this range. And the reason being is because, again, they're restricted by the fact they haven't operationalized their business. And they're also restricted by the owner's capacity. Like, the owner can only work so many hours. So the owner will be doing the work of the business, and they'll say, well, hey, you know what? Sales are dropping. So then they'll jump into sales and marketing. They'll focus on that. Then the business will grow a little bit. And then they'll say, wow, we've got so much business. Let me go work on the business. And they'll work on all the client work that comes in. And then the sales will go down. They'll go back to jumping into sales mode. And so they're never really growing a business. They're just jumping from one spot. Either it's delivering the service, or the next spot growing through sales, but they never actually expand anywhere. And so I'll see them by looking at companies' P&Ls and, look at the last 10 years, and it's essentially flat. Like they've kind of gone up and down and up and down. And it's mainly economy driven. They'll get a big client, they'll lose a big client, but they haven't actually gone anywhere because it's a yo-yo business. And I try to explain to them that it's because they haven't taken the time to have a vision and strategy to go somewhere, to go from one location to 5, and then made the operational shift to get there. They've been okay or satisfied or content with just existing. And that's most small companies.
Mm-hmm. And those two topics you just spoke about, they are connected, by the way. The yo-yo and what I would sort of verbalize as the earlier part of your statement, and you mentioned it earlier. It's sort of like working with the end in mind. What's your mission? If you don't have what the end in mind is, if you don't have that mission, then you don't really have standards to measure against. You need to have that. And that gets back to, again, doing that autopsy on the system, so that you have a very clear goal, you have your mission, and your mission obviously is to grow your business. So when it's doing that yo-yo, if you're reasonably intelligent and you're willing to admit that certain things aren't working, you're going to go back and look, and you're going to fix, and you're going to change. Give us some, maybe as a last word here, it could be anything you want, but there was some discussion about, I know you've coached hundreds of entrepreneurs, so you probably got, like, what are the top 5, 10, 20, whatever the number is, of productivity tips that you could share with us to sort of get us there?
Yeah, if I could just share one productivity tip, and this is not fun, this is not tedious, people don't like to do it, but if you would just time track, 2 or 3 days of your life, from the second you wake up, second you go to bed, and just track every single thing you do, isolate into separate things, like took a shower, walked the dog, every single thing. You're going to find things that you should be automating, delegating, deleting. You're going to find things you should be batching. You're going to find things that you should be shifting from afternoon to morning, when you're more, you have a sharper ability to get hard work done. And you're going to find ultimately a lot of waste. I think like that's the first system that is the easiest to work on, is your own schedule, your own life. And that's a place I usually start early on with my clients, because they're usually maxed out on time. And if we can find 2, 3, 4 hours, 10 hours a week of the time that's being wasted, then we can reutilize that time to grow their business. And so I would say that's the biggest thing. Is it's not some theory. It's very mechanical. It's like, I'm like, the clearest example that's coming to my head is I work with some home flippers, and they always want to keep their teams moving on the different jobs they're working on. And the owner will, like, drive to Home Depot, they'll drive to Lowe's, they'll get materials, they'll drive it to the different job sites. And I'm always like, how many hours a week are you spending driving to different materials stores and delivering material off? And we do the math, and it's like 10 hours a week. And I said, can someone, I know my 17-year-old son can do it. Can someone else drive and pick up materials instead of the owner of the company? And they're like, no one can do it. It's always urgent. And then last company, we found someone within a couple of weeks who could do it. And he's like, I just saved my life. I got so much time now. I can't believe it. And it came from him just writing out what his day-to-day looked like and realizing there's things he's doing that don't make any sense for the owner of the company to be doing. And if he just wrote down, in this case, how to pick up materials from different stores and deliver them to different job sites, he'd be free forever. And you take 10 hours a week and you multiply it by forever, or as long as you're going to live. That's a lot of time. And
absolutely.
So I think that's the biggest productivity tip that I would leave people.
That's a great takeaway. I'm a believer. Time is currency, and I'm a big believer in that. Again, I mean, we have to have you back because I could talk about this forever. I think this is, we're not talking about the widget here, and this is part of, sometimes I get a little frustrated with clients. They always want to talk about the widget, and I don't want to talk about the widget. The widget's not important. What's important is how we get there. And that's, that is really the essence of any business, every business. The product, I don't want to say the product is not important. The product is secondary to a certain extent. It's the mindset, it's how we get there. If people want to get in touch with you, Josh, what's the best way to do that? The simplest way to do that? And if it's a website or what have you, we will embed that in the link. We'll put a link in, so it'll be easy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, the big thing I want is everyone to get a copy of this book, and the summary of it is at my website, WTSenterprises.com. And so, everyone should go there. It's a great story. I didn't write it.
I'm reading it now. Okay.
And I think pretty much any small business owner can relate to Sam Carpenter's story and how he mechanically made more and works less by using this methodology. And of course, I'm always looking for new clients to work with, either through some of my coaching services, consulting services, and I have a lot of programs, and they're all at WTSenterprises.com.
Great. That's great to know. And again, thank you so much for being with us today. We absolutely have to have you back. I think it's very, very important. Again, I'm just so grateful that you shared your insights with us and with the audience.
Hey, glad to be here, Gary. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.